Today we want to finish up our circulatory system by talking about the blood vessels and the different kind of circulations that we have within our body. The blood vessels that we have in our body, along with the heart, form a complete closed circulatory system that we learned about earlier this year, where the blood always flows inside of vessels. The arteries, or there's three main types of blood vessels. We have the arteries, and the arteries carry blood away from the heart. Then we have the veins, which carry blood back to the heart. And then connecting those two, we have the capillaries, which are just tiny vessels which connect the arteries and the veins, and they're like our exchange vessels. This is where all the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide and nutrients and things like that takes place in these particular blood vessels. The arteries are usually deeper inside the body. You don't see them usually at the surface unless they're maybe at a joint. You might have the arteries closer to the surface, but usually the arteries of the body are deeper inside of the muscles, or even between muscles and bones. And some of the veins are located near the body surface, and you can see those kind of under your skin. They're a lot more visible. Now, blood leaves the heart through the arteries in the body, and the pulmonary artery is the one that goes to the lungs, and then we have another artery called the aorta, the biggest one, which kind of arches over the top of the heart, around the backside of the heart, and it continues down to the rest of your body. And the arteries form smaller vessels called arterioles. So arterioles are just smaller arteries, which in turn branch into microscopic capillaries. These capillaries are what we would call the functional unit of the circulatory system. They're the ones that actually do most of the things that we want the circulatory system to be able to do. They're the ones that diffuse oxygen and glucose and hormones and other essential substances into the cells that make up the body. Now, as the blood flows through these capillaries, it's going to absorb carbon dioxide and other waste substances, and then they're going to carry it away to the lungs or to the kidneys to remove certain things, or to the liver where, we've talked about before, the toxic substances are broken down. Now, the capillaries then will merge to form the venules, which are like little tiny veins, and then as they join together they become larger, and we have veins. So it leaves the heart in arteries, and as the arteries get smaller and smaller, we call them arterioles. Eventually we get down to the capillaries, the smallest vessels, and then these capillaries on the other end join together to make venules, and then eventually into veins. Now, one of the things that you notice in the circulatory system, you can feel your pulse, either by touching your wrist and feeling the pulse there, or in your neck or something like that. This pulse is really just the dilation and rebounding of the artery's walls. What do we mean by that? Well, your artery is like a tube, but it's an elastic tube, because remember it has that connective tissue around the outside, and every time your heart pumps, the pressure of the blood causes the artery to swell out a little bit. It pushes out against the walls, and that's what we would call dilation. And then when the in between hearts, when the pressure decreases, the connective tissue of the artery uh, pulls it back to a smaller opening. So we have this dilation where it goes out and then rebounding comes back in, and every time it goes out and in, we feel our pulse. Uh, Now in our artery, uh, it's made out of 3 layers, as we can see right here. Uh, the walls of the artery are quite a bit thicker than they are over here for the vein. Um, so the veins still have the same 3 walls, but they're a little thinner, less elastic, less muscular, because all those layers are a little bit thinner. But they all do have this uh, elastic connective tissue around the outside of it to absorb the pressure and make them more flexible so that they can return to their original position. But the veins possess a semilunar valve that prevents the blood from flowing backwards. So in this diagram right here, the blood can only go in this direction up here. Okay, it can only go in that direction, because if the blood comes backwards, it's going to push these valves closed. So blood, it only is allowed to go in one direction, and only the veins need that, because the blood flow in the arteries is pushed by the heart, but the heart cannot pull or push blood all the way through the veins. So the veins need little valves in it to keep the blood only moving in one direction. So this we would call venous circulation. This is the circulation coming back from the capillaries ultimately back to the heart. And this venous circulation is aided by these valves that the veins have, but it's also aided by muscular activity. So if we look at our diagram right here, we have 2 valves, let's say in this area of the vein, and we have muscles on either side of the vein, and when the muscles contract, they compress the vein in this area right here. That will increase the pressure on the blood. This bottom valve is going to prevent the blood from flowing backwards, so the blood only has one path that it can take, and that is up through this valve. And so muscle activity is actually helping the blood make its way back to the heart. Now let's talk about these paths of circulation. There's 2 main divisions of circulation. There's the pulmonary circulation, and then there's a systemic circulation. The pulmonary circulation is one that carries oxygen-poor blood from the right ventricle to the lungs for the purpose of absorbing oxygen and then releasing the carbon dioxide. Remember, we said the pulmonary artery is the only artery in your body that is oxygen poor, deoxygenated blood, and it's headed to the lungs. So we have the pulmonary artery, as it's pointing out right here. We have, it leaves, this is the right ventricle, and it leaves, one of it goes to one lung, and it branches and goes to the other lung. So that, and then after it's been oxygenated and lost its carbon dioxide, it's going to come back to the left side of our heart. So here are the pulmonary veins coming back over here to the left atrium. Here are some coming from the other lung to the left atrium. So in this left atrium has a place for these veins, pulmonary veins, the only veins in your body that are rich in oxygen, coming back to your left atrium. So that would be your pulmonary circulation, the circulation that's going from the heart to the lungs and then back to the heart. Then we have what's called the systemic circulation. It consists of the flow of blood from the left ventricle to all the parts of your bodies except the lungs, because it's already been to the lungs, and then back to the right atrium. And this circulation carries the oxygen and nutrients that it will pick up along the way to take them out to the body tissues. It's going to remove carbon dioxide and waste from the tissues as well. Besides nourishing the tissues, it's going to pick up any waste that they have. Now, another circulation, actually not another circulation, but a smaller circulation within the systemic is what we call the coronary circulation. And the coronary circulation supplies the heart. It carries blood into and out of the heart muscle. And there are two coronary arteries that carry blood away from the heart, and they branch off of this aorta. So you can see up here at the top, this big blood vessel coming out of here is called the aorta, and it has two branches for the coronary arteries that are going to nourish the heart. These coronary arteries branch off the aorta just past the aortic semilunar valve, and they're going to deliver nutrients and oxygen to the myocardium. Those are the muscles of your heart that pump the blood around. Then we have another circulation. Another part of the systemic circulation is the renal circulation, and the renal circulation carries blood into and out of the kidneys, and so that's why we call it the renal circulation. If you've ever heard of somebody being on dialysis, sometimes they call it renal dialysis. Why? Because the dialysis is trying to do what the kidneys aren't functioning properly to do. So as the blood flows through the kidneys, waste materials are removed for excretion as urine, and then the blood's going to leave the kidneys in the renal veins and take it back ultimately to the heart. And your renal veins are actually probably the cleanest. The blood in there is probably the cleanest because it's all been filtered out, the waste products that need to be excreted as urine. The final circulation pathway that's part of the systemic one is called the portal circulation. And the portal circulation is one that where the blood's going to flow through the liver and then to the inferior vena cava. The blood from the digestive system is going to flow through the liver and then into that inferior vena cava. And the blood from the digestive organs is going to be rich in food molecules. It's going to be carried to the liver by the hepatic vein. You can see this hepatic vein listed right here. It's going to carry it up there, and the liver cells are going to adjust the blood chemistry. They're going to take out and store materials that you have maybe too much of in your blood, and or in the opposite situation, if there's things lacking, they will then be putting them back in. So this is another important part of the systemic circulation, is the circulation that involves your digestive system, In other words, your small intestine and large intestine, and it also involves your liver, and there are some others organs you can see that are part of this. So that takes us to the end of our circulatory system.